We're heading first to Pakistan, which has witnessed two radical shifts in the political scene in recent weeks. One was the exit of a prime minister, once seen as a strongman of Pakistan politics. The other was the rise of radical elements as politicians. And now a third major development is unfolding. Former President and Army Chief General Pervez Musharraf is cozying up to Mumbai attack mastermind Hafiz Saeed as he prepares ground for his return from exile. What explains this newfound love? Here's a report.
A shift in Pakistan's politics happened this year. Nawaz Sharif lost his throne. He was forced to step down as the Prime Minister of Pakistan after he was found guilty in the Panama Papers case. Almost 4 months later, there was another shift in Pakistan's mainstream politics. Mumbai terror mastermind Hafiz Saeed was released from house arrest. Just a few days after his release, Hafiz Saeed would make his intentions clear. Through his political party, the Milli Muslim League, Saeed is eyeing a place in mainstream politics. And his ambitions have now received a boost from a former president. So why is Pervez Musharraf cozying up to the mastermind of the Mumbai terror attacks? After the exit of Nawaz Sharif, General Musharraf is looking to exploit the vacuum in Pakistan's politics. The Pakistan People's Party and the Pakistan Muslim League show little signs of a return. And Imran Khan's Tehreek-e-Insaf cannot go all the way on its own. One thing is for sure, any alliance between General Musharraf and Hafiz Saeed will have the backing of the ISI and the military. Pakistan's army, who have been caught on camera backing hardliners, is supporting activities of right-wing parties like Tehreek-e-Labbaik and Milli Muslim League. As part of its plan to mainstream radical elements, the army's tacit support for Saeed's new and dangerous initiatives is expected to continue. Bureau Report, WION.
Joining us this evening from Islamabad, WION's Pakistan Bureau Chief Taha Siddiqui. We have T.C. Ragan, former Indian High Commissioner to Pakistan, with us from New Delhi. Ahmed Shaheen, investigative journalist also from Islamabad, and Michael Kugelman, Senior Associate for South Asia Program at the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington. Good evening to all of you. Amir, let me come to you first. Musharraf held the highest constitutional office in Pakistan. He headed the army. For him to be professing support to a terror outfit and saying that he supports them in the quote-unquote suppression of the Indian army, the army of a neighboring country, is this the clearest admission yet on record that Pakistan is a state sponsor of terror?
Highest constitutional position, but he was a usurper. He came to power by abrogating the
Irrespective, he held the office.
So I wouldn't say it was the highest constitutional position, because him being there was unconstitutional, as much as him meddling with politics and playing around with the terrorists, creating these new political parties based on terrorist organizations. All of that is not constitutional. And like I always say, it does not represent the political setup of Pakistan. But President Pervez Musharraf, who was a dictator, is a former general, he's got more than a dozen political parties in his own little array of political circus, as I might be correct in saying that. And I mean, right now, the political party that he used last time when he was the dictator to win and get into elections had no public base. And these political parties do not have public base either. So he does not represent the political setup of Pakistan. He was a military dictator.
He represented the state of Pakistan for almost a decade. He headed the army of Pakistan. He headed, whether he took it constitutionally or otherwise, the highest constitutional office, I repeat, of Pakistan. For a man like this, who's also looking at a comeback, to be saying that he supports Hafiz Saeed, that he supports what he does in Kashmir, my question again, Emmer, is this the clearest admission yet that Pakistan sponsors, the state of Pakistan sponsors terrorism against India?
General Musharraf is not the state of Pakistan. He did usurp the power and get into decision-making. The military is not the state of Pakistan. The military, unfortunately, does have a lot of influence on the foreign policy and within and internal political weather and climate of Pakistan. But that does not represent Pakistan. Unfortunately, when democratic institutions are weakened and the military does come into power, that's when it does. Today's Pakistan is not represented by General Musharraf. Today's Pakistan should not allow Hafiz Saeed and other terrorists to contest elections. And I hope today's Pakistan would not do that.
Well, today's Pakistan is also represented by those who let Hafiz Saeed walk free, but you've said it yourself, Emmer. Taha Siddiqui, why is he saying what he's saying now, and how do people in Pakistan view these statements coming from a man who's been in exile for many years now, who faces serious charges, including treason, in Pakistan?
Well, to begin with, this has a bit of two folds of, aspects to it. One is the Jamaat-ud-Dawa itself and the evolution that we've seen, what's happening with it in the recent times. It's a reincarnation of Lashkar-e-Taiba. It's now Jamaat-ud-Dawa. And now it also has a political wing of Milli Muslim League, which was recently introduced. And there are reports that suggest that the military establishment wants to de-radicalize these groups and bring them into the parliament or the political system, but also at the same time dent perhaps the PMLN, the ruling party's vote in Punjab. So that's why Jamaat-ud-Dawa is coming forward. Now, definitely because of that very fact that Jamaat-ud-Dawa might have that backing of the military establishment in the country, Musharraf is sort of banking on that aspect also, because he wants to come back to the country. He has political ambitions. He's had political ambitions ever since he retired from his presidency, and he's been trying to make a comeback. And so he's signaling to those groups and those political sort of setups, or even religious setups in the country. Just 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, he tried to make another coalition of around about 23 parties, which fell apart in a few days. So he's trying to make a comeback up ahead of the elections. It's interesting times in Pakistan because of all of these elections. We're seeing that there is a clear establishment versus the ruling party, the PMLN, right now, kind of competition ongoing, and those camps are clearly being divided as we see as we run up to the elections.
T.C. Raghavan, this is the same man who declared a unilateral ceasefire along the line of control back in 2003. For the next 4 years, back-channel talks were on in an effort to strike peace between India and Pakistan. This was under the leadership of Pervez Musharraf from the Pakistani side. Did New Delhi misread this man?
No, I don't believe New Delhi misread the man, but you're talking about events which are now a decade in the past. The situation has changed, people change a great deal. And Musharraf clearly has changed because he's unable to reconcile himself to a retired life, to a life in retirement. And as your other guest said, Pakistan now is entering an election season. It is open season for all kinds of people to throw their hats in the ring, and he too has thrown his hat in the ring, and he's trying various things. He's trying with the MQM, he's trying with an assortment of various parties which exist only on paper, and finally he's trying with the Jamaat-ud-Dawa because he wants to appear to be all things to all men. But the fundamental issue over here is that he is unable to reconcile himself to a life in retirement. And I doubt very much these outlandish statements which he's coming out with are going to generate a great deal of traction in Pakistan.
Michael Kugelman, how does this endorsement from a former president of a designated global terrorist reflect on Pakistan? What is Pervez Musharraf's locus standi in affairs related to Pakistan today?
Well, I think he really is somewhat of an irrelevant figure. I think that he simply does not have the significance and the clout that he used to. Clearly, though, there is some nostalgia in Pakistan for his rule. I mean, there are pockets of folks in Pakistan that look fondly on how things were when he was in power, particularly relative to how things are now, where there's tremendous criticism toward the civilians and the PMLN government now, and also the Pakistan People's Party government before it. So there certainly are some notable constituencies that look back fondly on Musharraf's rule, which did feature things like some degree of economic liberalization, media liberalization, and I imagine that Musharraf may want to try to capitalize on that. But at the end of the day, I mean, as was said before, this is not the first time he's trying to mount a comeback. I remember 5 years ago having similar types of conversations when he was planning to come to Pakistan and build a new movement. But, he said some very strange things, quite frankly. And it sort of reminds me of another politician in the region, very different, but nonetheless, Hamid Karzai in Afghanistan, who's no longer in power, still wants to remain influential, and has said some very strange things, perhaps to appeal to certain constituencies. In Karzai's case, he was talking about how the U.S. and ISIS have worked together. Musharraf now talking about his tremendous respect and support for Hafiz Saeed. It clearly is meant to appeal to a certain constituency, but I do not think that Musharraf retains the level of influence that he used to. There are a lot of legal barriers as well. If he were to try to come to Pakistan, theoretically, he could be arrested. So I don't think we should overstate the significance of these developments involving Musharraf and his ambitions to return to power.
In fact, interesting that you bring that up. I'm going to request you all to stay with us. In Pakistan, I can tell our viewers, Pervez Musharraf, according to reports, is remembered as the army chief who threw out his prime minister. He's accused of treason and a lot else, and he hopes now that the army will help him return to that country. Here's what awaits General Pervez Musharraf in his country.
9 years after he lost the elections and left Pakistan with the Damocles sword of impeachment hanging over his head, Pervez Musharraf appears itching to return to political life from his exile in Dubai. He seems ready and willing to tie up with just about any political group, even the Lashkar-e-Toiba.
मतलब अभी तक तो कोई बात नहीं हुई है, लेकिन फ्यूचर में अलायंस में अगर वो शामिल होना चाह रहे हैं, by all means, मैं तो I would welcome them.
But why does Musharraf hope to return? The pundits say Musharraf hopes to capitalize on the current political uncertainty in Islamabad. His enemy Nawaz Sharif has been removed as Prime Minister. Sharif's Muslim League, while still in power, has been seriously weakened. The Pakistan People's Party is in the opposition and not a threat. But his attempts to forge a grand alliance of 23 parties last month fell apart within 24 hours. Some Pakistani analysts have speculated that the army could use him to leverage its relations with the Muhajir community, as Musharraf is a Muhajir. But the dominant Muhajir party in Karachi, the MQM, has already rejected proposals to bring him into the party. There's also reason to believe that the army could reject him. The army may have even less reason to turn to him as he is discredited. He faces treason charges for suspending the constitution in 2007 and imposing an emergency. He is accused of complicity in the assassination of Benazir Bhutto. He also faces charges in the killing of the Baloch nationalist Akbar Bukti. The current army chief, General Qamar Bajwa, who is many years Musharraf's junior, may not relish having to play second fiddle to him when the army is pretty much in charge in Pakistan. With the Muslim League weakened and the opposition People's Party in no position to fight back, the army is pushing ahead with its plan to mainstream the jihadi groups. The September 2018 elections could well see the Lashkar-e-Toiba and other jihadi groups field candidates. Although religious parties have generally fared poorly in elections, it could be different next year if the army goes ahead with sidelining the mainstream parties and ensuring a dominant political space for its allies, the jihadis.
Emir Shaheen, where does Pervez Musharraf, the politician, stand in the scheme of things in Pakistan right now?
Pervez Musharraf is a wanted man in Pakistan. If law does take its legal course, he should never have been even allowed to get out of Pakistan. He is a wanted man. The cases on him, as the report also mentioned, is of murder, is of terrorism, is of abrogating the constitution. These are grave accusations of General Pervez Musharraf, and his advisors are telling him not to come back. This is not the Pakistan where an elected prime minister could be hanged. This is a new Pakistan where the elected prime minister has been sent back home. But there has been protests. So this is a different kind of Pakistan, and General Pervez Musharraf will have to think twice before coming back to Pakistan. And General Musharraf does not have a political clout. Yes, there are circles that may constitute as his supporters, but I don't think General Musharraf would be even able to get one single seat in the parliament. Musharraf right now, without the help of the military establishment, is a non-political issue. He has no political clout or standing whatsoever.
Okay. You certainly aren't voting for him if he comes back. Taha Siddiqui, the man he's hoping to ally with Hafiz Saeed, has launched a party called the MML, which the Pakistan Election Commission is yet to recognize and officially register yet. Two individuals, Yaqub Sheikh and Liaquat Ali Khan, contested by elections in Lahore and Peshawar respectively. Is Hafiz Saeed's political entry then a done deal?
Definitely. I mean, he just recently met with some senior journalists and columnists in Lahore, and he spoke to them. And apparently, from what it came out of that, was that he wants to contest the upcoming elections. So, Milli Muslim League, the plan to field its candidates in the upcoming elections, and perhaps, I mean, I don't see a victory as such, but the way, because I covered the NA 120 in Lahore, and the way I saw them organized, the way they were, their operations were streamlined when coming to, even though they were contesting elections for the first time, and at that time as an independent candidate, not as a candidate that that the party has not been registered as yet. But the organization that you see behind them, behind Milli Muslim League, it feels like they're definitely very serious about elections, and what they will do is definitely they will dent the vote and eat the vote bank of the PMLN in Punjab, and that's perhaps why they have been introduced to begin with.
Michael Kugelman, this is clearly a brazen attempt to exploit the waning political influence of traditional players in Pakistan ahead of next year's elections. Do you see an alliance between Hafiz Saeed and Pervez Musharraf taking shape in Pakistan?
No, I don't know if it would go that far. I think it's true that the Hafiz Saeed situation here is more one of parties that he supports coming into the political fold, and not Saeed himself. I don't think that he's going to take any type of overt role. It would be hard for him to do that for logistical purposes. But I think that what we're really going to be looking at here are the likes of the Milli Muslim League getting out there, providing support to independent candidates so that they can, essentially, these independents can get out there and run on the nasty views of the MML. But the notion of some type of alliance between Musharraf and Hafiz Saeed, that to me comes across as really quite far-fetched, and I think it's a lot of talk and not much else. But the bigger concern here is this mainstreaming of militant groups. The fact of the matter is that Lashkar-e-Taiba has a party in the ring, so to speak. I mean, the MML it's affiliated with LET, and it's going to be out there running in the national elections, which is really, if you think about it, quite extraordinary and quite scary, because what does that do at the end of the day?
Right.
It gives credibility to the types of hardline ideological views that are propagated by the likes of Lashkar-e-Taiba.
That's exactly what seems to be happening here. T.C. Raghavan, it seems far-fetched according to most people on this panel, and yet with Pakistan, you really don't know which way things are going. What would this alliance, if it came into being, mean for India?
Well, the alliance, it's a very big if, as your other guests have said, if it came into being, the first question is that apart from the alliance itself, how big a presence would it have in the new parliament? To my mind, neither Hafiz Saeed nor Pervez Musharraf can ever command a significant presence in a political architecture without the support of the army. And the army clearly would not want liabilities of this kind, and both Hafiz Saeed and Pervez Musharraf, to a great extent, are liabilities to be foisted on them. The army has certain interests with regard to the Lashkar-e-Taiba, and they will certainly try to mainstream the Jamaat-ud-Dawa while keeping the militant and the extremist elements within the Lashkar-e-Taiba and the Jamaat-ud-Dawa ready to be used as instruments of state policy as they have been in the past. That is their larger game plan, not so much what happens to Hafiz Saeed or what happens to Pervez Musharraf.
Right, we'll wait and see.
Their ultimate aim is really to play the role of a kingmaker between the different established political parties.
All right, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm out of time here. Taha Siddiqui, T.C. Raghavan, Ahmed Shaheen and Michael Kugelman. We don't know if Pervez Musharraf is going to return to Pakistan and when. Let's talk about the man who is in Pakistan. He came to Islamabad with the aim of finding common ground to fight terrorism. Hours after winding up talks with Pakistan's top civil military leadership, U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis said, and I quote, "There is a need to build positive and continuous ties with each other. Pakistan and the U.S. need to find common ground. The U.S. is aware of sacrifices Pakistan has made in fighting terrorism. The purpose of my visit is to ensure our long-term alliance continues in future. Whether any common ground has been found or not, is not clear, nor is it clear if Mattis read the riot act to the Pakistanis on their support to terrorism or whether he decided to play safe and pat them on the back. Here's what Mattis said hours before landing in Islamabad.
They have lost hundreds, thousands of their troops killed and wounded by terrorists. They have lost hundreds, thousands of their innocent people murdered and wounded by terrorists. So we know that there's common ground.
So what's clear is that both sides do need each other. In fact, this is what the US wants. It wants Pakistani cooperation in fighting the Taliban in Afghanistan. It wants Pakistan to crack down on the Haqqani network. The Haqqanis are seen as a force behind the Taliban. The US is dependent on Pakistan for movement of its logistics to Afghanistan. What does Pakistan want from this alliance? It is dependent on the US for economic aid. It needs access to American markets for exports. It needs US cooperation in securing low-cost loans, among other things. At all costs, Pakistan cannot afford at this point to alienate Washington. Its fragile economy cannot withstand sanctions. Its budget making could collapse if the US withholds financial assistance, nor can it militarily take on America. Right-thinking Pakistani generals have no illusions that China will come to Islamabad's aid if a military confrontation looms. The Mattis visit could be another attempt by the US to rebuild ties with an old ally, but there could be an element of frustration also over Islamabad's intransigence on terrorism. Witness CIA Chief James Pompeo's warning, and I'm quoting, "In the absence of the Pakistanis achieving that ridding their country of insurgent bases, we are going to do everything we can to make sure that the safe havens no longer exist." There seems to be little doubt then that the US and Pakistan have drifted apart since the end of the Afghan jihad. Both have found new friends, the US with India, Pakistan with China, but old ties cannot be cast aside, not when the two still have need for each other. Yemen is witnessing the worst humanitarian crisis in the world right now. Here's a report on the war that doesn't even make international headlines.
Yemen, the poorest country in the Arabian Peninsula, has been in the grip of a deadly civil war since 3 years. 8,700 people have died in the conflict so far, and nearly 50,000 have been injured. The country is under a strict blockade, leaving its nearly 30 million population desperately short of food, fuel and medicines. Doctors have not been paid in a year. Add to that, a deadly cholera outbreak is taking a tragic toll of children. But when and how did these all start? If we are to choose a year, it would be 2011. The former President Ali Abdullah Saleh had been ruling for 3 decades and was ousted from power in 2011. He was then succeeded by Abdurrahman Mansour Hadi. But autocracy was not the only problem Yemen had. Yemen faced a separatist movement in the south. Al-Qaeda in the Arabic Peninsula was based out of Yemen. The military was divided, pledging allegiance to different political parties. Yemen suffered widespread corruption and unemployment. The Houthi movement was quick to profit from the people's disillusion and frustration. They had already conducted several uprisings against Saleh and banked on the Shia minority to strengthen their position. The Houthis pushed forward their claims as a credible political force, promising stability, anti-corruption campaigns and the reviving of the Yemeni economy. Words became weapons. They successfully advanced on Sana'a and other territories, conquering them all. Former President Saleh formed a fragile alliance with the Houthis. Despite years of rivalry, he knew very well this was the only hope he had to retain his influence. And this is when the House of Saud stepped in. The kingdom could not accept a Shia-dominated rebel movement at its doorstep. They accused Iran of backing the Houthis and put together a military coalition to fight for Hadi. They stopped the Houthis' advance and imposed a full-scale blockade on Yemen. The security and humanitarian situation plummeted by the day, and in this atmosphere of turmoil, Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State made their way into Yemen. Al-Qaeda gained quickly the upper hand and managed to seize control of a large portion of Yemen. Then, on December the 2nd, a twist happens. Former President Saleh reaches out to the Saudis in a bid to negotiate peace. The Houthis accused him of betrayal and attacked his supporters in and around the capital, Sana'a. It has muddled the conflict further, deepening the uncertainty over Yemen's future and dashing hopes of the long-suffering civilian population. Yemen's war is not only an Arab problem, it is a global problem. Al-Qaeda has a safe haven in Yemen from where it can plan and strategize future global actions undisturbed. The war in Yemen is also increasing tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia. It is a rivalry which could provoke a wider conflict with disastrous consequences for the entire West Asia. Daniele Pagani for WION.
Jerusalem. Now, an uprising is brewing in Palestine amid reports that US President Donald Trump will recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. This is something that no American president has done since the State of Israel was established 70 years ago. So is the US State Department staring at another diplomatic face-off? And what does it mean for the West Asia peace deal?
The possibility of another diplomatic face-off is looming large for the White House. After his war of tweets with British Prime Minister Theresa May, a campaign promise might miff US President Donald Trump's close ally, Saudi Arabia. Donald Trump's plans to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital started off as a campaign pledge. But several media reports say Trump is keen on fulfilling his promise. This could potentially derail the president's ambitious plans to bring peace to West Asia. The diplomatic status of Jerusalem is one of the world's most contested issues. Both Israel and Palestine stake claim to it as their capital city. Jerusalem is home to holy sites for Jews, Christians and Muslims. If President Trump decides to take Israel's side, it will have an impact on America's ties with West Asia and even other Islamic nations around the world. Trump's decision could derail Jared Kushner's plans. The US president has put his son-in-law and advisor in charge of West Asia peace plan. In the past few months, Kushner has even paid a few visits to Saudi Arabia to hold talks with the senior leadership. That's why on Sunday, in a rare public interaction, Kushner made an attempt to calm some nerves.
What I'll say is that the president's going to make his decision, and
he hasn't made his decision?
He's still looking at a lot of different facts, and that when he makes his decision, he'll be the one to want to tell you, not me. So he'll make sure he does that at the right time.
The Palestinian president has issued a warning to America. Mahmoud Abbas fears that America's recognition of Jerusalem will jeopardize the peace talks. When Donald Trump visited West Asia in May this year, it was widely speculated that he would recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. A decision which has been hanging for 7 months could finally come to a head this week. Bureau Report, WION.
With us this evening, Arsen Ostrovsky, Executive Director of the Israeli Jewish Congress from Tel Aviv, Mustafa Barghouti, General Secretary of the Palestine National Initiative with us from Ramallah, and Stephen Golub, International Affairs Expert with us from California. Good evening to all of you. Arsen, let me begin with you. We've heard this before. Is it happening this time?
Look, no one knows. I think that
there's a problem with your audio. I do apologize to our viewers. We'll try and reconnect with you, Arsen Ostrovsky. Mustafa, what are you picking up? We understand that President Abbas is talking to various parties, trying to prevent the Americans from taking this step. What is the buzz on the ground?
If the American president moves on this issue and decides to declare Jerusalem as a capital of Israel, or moves his embassy to Jerusalem, this would mean that the United States decided to participate in a war crime in violation of international law, which prohibits annexation of occupied territories. It would also mean that the President of the United States is deciding that USA will have no role in the future in any peace process. As a matter of fact, he would be assassinating the potentials for a peace process. More than that, I think this will be a very destabilizing issue. I think those who are planning to move in that direction have a great deal of ignorance, because they don't understand what Jerusalem means to 1.6 billion Muslims and 2.2 billion Christians. not to talk about, of course, Palestinians and Israelis, but also to 360 million Arabs. This would be a disastrous move. It would be a reckless move, and it will only complicate the situation further, and it will definitely kill the so-called New Peace Initiative. It's very dangerous, and it should be stopped in every possible way.
Arsen, I'm told we fixed the line with you, and I know that you are in support of the embassy and all other embassies shifting to Jerusalem, but don't you think that it'll deal a death blow to the peace process wherever it stands right now?
No, look, I don't think it will do that at all. To date so far, Jerusalem has not been recognized as Israel's capital. But you know what? That has not prevented the Palestinians from launching campaign after campaign of terror, intifada, violence and stabbings against Israel. Quite simply put, there is never the wrong time to do the right thing. Jerusalem has been the capital of Israel, of the Jewish people, and only the Jewish people throughout history. It is the only nation that is not allowed, which it should be by international law, to define its own capital. To say that recognizing Jerusalem would be a war crime is just as absurd as saying that recognizing India's capital would be a war crime, which it is, of course, not. So I don't think it would actually hamper peace process. On the contrary, I think it would actually promote the peace process, one, by correcting a long-standing injustice, but two, and very importantly, demonstrating a very powerful message to the Palestinians that the international community, led by this administration, will no longer remain hostage to the Palestinian threats, extortion and intimidation.
Let's ask the American on the panel. Stephen, what will it change and why now? Why is the American president talking about this now?
Well, it's a technical matter. There's a 6-month renewal of a law that President Trump is up to certify or recertify. But so that's part of the timing. I think more broadly, while I agree that it may be excessive rhetoric to call this a war crime, I do feel that this potentially is very destabilizing for the region and runs against U.S. interests, certainly, and the interests of other countries and in the region in terms of potentially not just leading to violence and instability in terms of Israel and Palestine, but potentially for Jordan as well, a steadfast U.S. ally, which has a very large Palestinian population, which could get very upset by this, by fracturing or causing increased anti-U.S. sentiment in the Arab world. It could hurt the war against terror. It could hurt the U.S. contest with Iran over influence in the region. In other words, it could really be counterproductive, not just for the two peoples involved, but for the U.S. interests in the region as well, and stability in the region, running against U.S. interests in all sorts of ways.
Mustafa, very quickly, what can Palestine do beyond registering a strong protest?
Relations with the United States, and we will not consider it a mediator. And we will have to turn to an alternative strategy, but we will do everything we can with all countries. By the way, if the United States does that, it will isolate itself. It will be the only country in the world, the only one in the world that recognizes Jerusalem as a capital. And by the way, Jerusalem is not like New Delhi. Jerusalem is occupied. Delhi is not occupied. And one more thing, I don't think the Israelis can continue to claim that they are victims in this conflict. They are trying to hide the fact that they are occupying us since 50 years, the longest occupation in modern history. They have established a system of apartheid that is much worse than what prevailed in South Africa. They are continuously oppressing us. And basically, they are destroying every item of negotiations that were supposed to be negotiated. It was decided in Oslo Agreement that issues like settlements, borders, Jerusalem, refugees have to be negotiated, and no side can impose facts on the ground unilaterally. If the United States recognizes Jerusalem as a capital, it will not be only supporting a violation of Israeli violation of international law and of the peace agreement, it will be participating in that violation. And that is very dangerous. By the way, this is another example of how far the Zionist lobby can go in Washington.
Okay.
In my opinion, it has reached a point of harming the U.S. interest in the Middle East.
Well, the U.S. can decide for itself, Arsen, but the buzz is that Jared Kushner, who's in charge of the peace process, the ultimate deal that President Trump believes he can foist upon the region, is not in favor of shifting the embassy just yet.
Look, I'm not sure whether he's in favor personally or not. Again, it remains to be seen what President Trump does. But interestingly, today there was a report through the New York Times indicating that the Saudi Arabians put forward their own proposal, which included a number of aspects to it. But one in particular relevant to this discussion is that the Saudis reportedly proposed that the capital of the future Palestinian state will be not in Jerusalem, but in Abu Dis, a suburb outside of Jerusalem. But I wanted to touch on another important note just regarding one thing that Mr. Barghouti said, that this would damage possible peace talks. Look, the reality is there are no peace talks, and there are no peace talks because the Palestinian leadership under Mahmoud Abbas has repeatedly refused to enter into negotiations with Israelis. They're more interested in embracing the terrorist group Hamas than engaging in any meaningful negotiations. But when it comes to the response of the international community, including the broader Middle East and the Gulf states, I actually think that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and in particular the geographic location of Israel's embassy, is not a top priority. The countries in the Gulf and the Middle East are far more concerned today with the rampaging Iran and ISIS and the terrorist concerns in their borders. So I don't think that the geographic location of Israel's embassy is a primary concern to them. And more importantly, I think they need U.S. support in terms of dealing with these other situations on their home ground. So again, I think that the issue of the embassy of Israel, which is in a rightful place like every other country, in the capital which they recognize, ought to be a decision that should be made without any delay.
And this is Donald Trump we're talking about, so we'll have to wait and see. Stephen Golub, thanks very much. I'm afraid I'm out of time on this. Mustafa Barghouti, Arsen Ostrovsky, thank you very much. The city of Jerusalem, in fact, due to its disputed nature, was placed under international control by the United Nations in 1949, and that is why countries have their embassies in Tel Aviv, which is Israel's second largest city. And to this day, no country has an embassy in Jerusalem. Countries which operate consulates in Jerusalem do not regard them as diplomatic missions to Israel or Palestine. Around 10 countries have their consulates in Jerusalem, and out of these, 4 diplomatic missions operate for Israel and the Palestinian Authority. Out of the permanent 5 of the Security Council, France, the UK and the US have presence in Jerusalem. The US has played with the idea of having an embassy in Jerusalem before, but stopped short of doing it. Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, both in their time called for moving the embassy, but they decided not to go ahead with it during their presidency. Will Donald Trump walk the talk? We'll have to wait and see.